Esta semana en News 24, Israel bajo ataque. News 24 en español trae el análisis y la información de los acontecimientos de la guerra, Espadas de Hierro.
Entrevistas exclusivas, reportes desde la zona de guerra, la reacción de los países hispanoparlantes.
News 24, el único medio en español que te mantiene informado y conectado con la comunidad latina en Israel. News 24, únicamente en i24 News.
Welcome to or back to this special broadcast on I-24 News. I'm Caleb Ben David. It's day 61 of Israel's war against Hamas. And as we've been reporting, fierce fighting in the Gaza Strip again today in both the northern half of the Strip as Israel continues its mopping up operations there against Hamas terrorists still in that area. And also now in the southern half of the Gaza Strip, especially the key city of Khan Yunis. Here's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu speaking this evening about IDF troops reaching the home of Hamas leader Yehia Sinwar in Khan Yunis.
Last night, I said that our forces can reach anywhere in the Gaza Strip. Now they surround Sinwar's house, so his home is not his fortress, and he can escape, but it's only a matter of time before we get him.
For more, let's go to our correspondent, Guy Azriel, who is down near the Israel-Gaza border, near the town of Sderot. And Guy, maybe more of a symbolic achievement, reaching the home of Yehia Sinwar. Of course, he's not there. He's presumably in hiding or in one of those tunnels. But still a clear indication that the fight against Hamas in the southern part of the Strip has moved into even the center of Khan Yunis.
Yes, we just heard the IDF spokesperson referring to that statement of Netanyahu saying that Sinwar is not at home, obviously has been hiding in one of the tunnels. He's saying that Sinwar is underground without getting into details, suggesting that the IDF has information about his possible whereabouts. And yes, it is a highly symbolic move surrounding his home and taking over his home, because Khan Yunis is considered a major stronghold of Hamas. Of course, it is the second largest city in the Gaza Strip after Gaza City, a major stronghold of Hamas. And today, the 98th Division of the IDF, the commander forces with other special units, are inside the city right now, from door to door, engaged in very close range fights with Hamas terrorists. It is a symbolic move, but beyond that, has great operational meaning as well, as the IDF continues to eliminate Hamas's terror capability, both in the north and in the southern part of the Gaza Strip. And we're seeing some evidence of that. The rocket fire is slowing down. We have seen some of that earlier this afternoon, but it has been over 3.5 hours now since the last rocket fire. The strongholds that Hamas still holds, of course, mainly in the southern part of the Strip, but also in the neighborhoods of Sajid Shujaiya and Jabalia. I'm not sure if our viewers can hear, but there's some very heavy shelling taking place right now as the IDF continues to operate over here as well in the north. And throughout the day here, we heard drones, we heard fighter jets, we even heard automatic fire. So there is so much fighting going on in many areas of the Gaza Strip throughout the day.
All right, Guy Azriel there down near the Israel-Gaza border. Thank you for that. Joining us in studio now is an expert in fighting terror and in the exact kind of warfare that the IDF is conducting now in the Gaza Strip. He is retired Colonel Richard Kemp, CBE, former commander of the British forces in Afghanistan. Richard, thank you for joining us. Well, let's talk about the IDF move into Khan Yunis, a densely populated urban area, slightly different from North Gaza, but interesting, the IDF taking a slightly different strategy. For example, we've seen what reportedly are commando units moving deep into Khan Yunis, reaching that target of the home of Yahya Sinwar, symbolic target, even before it's really managed to secure the area of Khan Yunis itself.
Yeah, and I think this will be much the way of the operation as it progresses compared to northern Gaza. And of course, you know, the IDF, as they fought for the last few weeks, have gained a lot of knowledge about the way Hamas is operating. They've learnt lessons from their own operations, and of course one of the key things is to destroy the enemy as effectively as possible while minimizing civilian deaths. And of course there are very, very many civilians in that southern part of Gaza.
Right, and targeting and also becoming under international pressure, especially from the U.S. to try to minimize it. And we may see perhaps more of these pinpoint operations. We'll talk a little about that more. But it was another day loss, along with that combat in the south. It was another day of fire across the Israel-Lebanon border. Hezbollah launching multiple strikes, rocket attacks, anti-tank fire across the border. The Israeli Air Force responding with airstrikes against Hamas targets in southern Lebanon. Let's go to our Zach Anders, who is in northern Israel near that border. And Zach, another day like those days we've seen since the end of the ceasefire, that firing, but some promises being made today also by the defense minister, Yoav Gallant, about where this situation in the north may eventually be going.
And those conversations take place against the backdrop of 7 attacks today that Hezbollah has taken responsibility for and claimed that it was them through Lebanese media channels. These attacks are targeting IDF positions all along the northern border here. It does not appear that today there were any injuries and that the defensive capabilities held the ability to knock down some of these attempted strikes and to defend these Israeli positions. The defense minister, Gallant, as he spoke to mayors and heads of council here for the communities that have been evacuated, made the point that the future here for northern Israel, for southern Lebanon in particular, will look like Israel holding to the 1701 agreement. This is off the backs of the 2006 war, the 2006 Lebanon war, with the deal being essentially that the Hezbollah fighters need to abide by that original agreement. That original agreement was to have no forces south of the Litani River. Gallant saying that for this security situation to resolve itself, that will have to be upheld. Now, the question then becomes, how can that be achieved with Hezbollah striking just about every day here and amassing a large force on the border below that river, below that agreed upon line? The question that does become, is it going to be offensive capabilities that change the reality here? Or will there need to be some sort of international pressure, some form of outside externalities, different nations, perhaps the United States, pushing Lebanon, pushing Hezbollah in particular, perhaps even needing to go through Iran and having Iran make this agreement happen? There's a lot of unknowns, of course, but with as many players that are here, for something like this to be upheld, an agreement that's been breached time and time again over the last decade, it will be a significant challenge. And that's why Gallant is telling these community leaders and the thousands, the over 80,000 people that have been evacuated from the north, that there is no clear timeline. It does not appear that they will be able to return anytime soon, that whatever it takes to resolve this situation is weeks, maybe even months away.
All right, Zach Anders there in northern Israel near the border with Lebanon. Thank you for that. And Richard, just to follow up, there are also reports coming out in media this evening that Amos Hochstein, the special envoy of the U.S. State Department to the Middle East, the man who basically negotiated the maritime agreement between Israel and Lebanon, is now working, speaking with Lebanese officials, government officials at least, about trying to resolve some of the outstanding border issues, land border issues that Lebanon has with Israel. A lot of those centered over the area that's known as Mount Dove or the Sheba Farms, hoping that they can resolve those border issues. Another agreement that would supersede 1701 could be reached that would have Hezbollah pull its forces back out of South Lebanon, north of Litani. But how realistic is that Hezbollah would even abide by agreement, even that the Lebanese government would reach, while we know its real marching orders come from Tehran?
Yeah, I think it's very unrealistic, unfortunately. I've been also heard that there's promises of very large amounts of money changing hands in order to get the Lebanese government to apply pressure. But of course, the real influences, as you say, are in Tehran. And Tehran is going to be very badly damaged by what's happening in Gaza now, one of their main proxies being annihilated, we hope. That leaves them in a much weakened position in the region, significantly weakened. Are they then going to be willing to show further weakness by allowing Hezbollah to pull back north? And secondly, the other consideration they have to make is that I would assume if there is no voluntary withdrawal by Hezbollah up to the north, beyond the Litani River, then Israel's going to deal with Hamas in the south. And does Iran want to lose such a huge capability in a bloody fight with the IDF in the south of Israel? They've got to balance those two things. But I think my sense in this is that we're talking about a fight rather than some diplomatic solution.
I mean, the other, even more, let's say, ominous alternative is having Hezbollah stepping up its provocations, cross-border provocations in Israel, shooting its rockets and missiles deeper into Israel than that northern area, as Israel closes in, for example, on the leadership of Hamas. How likely do you think it is, or do you think they'll be concerned that, as you said, could lead to a situation with a full-out confrontation between the IDF and Hezbollah, which Hezbollah would lose?
I think we've seen enough of the way Hezbollah has been operating since the war began to indicate that they're probably not going to be pushing some kind of more intensive fight with Israel if they don't have to have it. I suspect that's the case. I think otherwise we'd have seen some kind of greater action already. I don't think that Iran or Hezbollah wish to lose such a huge amount of their capability, to sort of stand up for or stand in solidarity with Hamas.
All right, Richard, stay with us. Let's take a look at another proxy of Iran in the region, Yemen's Houthi rebels. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Israel's Arrow anti-missile air defense system today again shot down over the Red Sea Iranian-made ballistic missiles launched by Yemen's Houthi rebels against the city of Eilat. Not for the first time. In fact, this was the fifth time this happened. This as the Houthis continue its attacks against shipping in and around the Red Sea. They're claiming to target Israeli-owned vessels, but in reality, these attacks mainly are directed against ships only with tangential or even non-existent connections to Israel. Now, one of those was the freighter, the Galaxy Leader, that was seized by the Houthis last month. Now it's apparently been converted by them into something of a local tourist attraction. Let's take a look.
Today we are on board of the Israeli ship, the Galaxy Leader, that has turned into an attraction. Instead of being a shipping vessel for the Israelis, it turned into an attraction for the Yemenis from all provinces. A big number of Yemeni people are touring it every day. Instead of going to parks and beaches, they are now visiting the Galaxy Leader ship.
We will seize the Israeli ships in the Red Sea and at the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. And as the Mujahideen and the Sayyid Abdul Malik Badruddin al-Houthi, may Allah protect him, have vowed, 2 warships were hit yesterday at Bab el-Mandeb. And all this is in defense of our brothers in Gaza and the children that are being struck and killed at hospitals and the women in their homes.
Again, Richard, the question has to be asked about the Houthis. We see Israel being effectively at least shooting down the missiles that have been launched. We should mention one of those, the U.S. Also has its naval forces deployed in that area, and they've been deploying its anti-missile systems against those rockets fired by the Houthis. But this issue of the shipping, this is not, as we said, these are ships with tangential or no connection really to Israel itself. Who this impacts are the major Western nations, the United States, Europe, Great Britain, even some countries like Japan. How long are they going to be willing or stand by while the Houthis continue to threaten shipping in that key waterway?
Well, they should already have reacted to the actions that have taken place already. And of course, Israel is under fire from the Houthis, but I think we've seen already that Israel is capable pretty much of containing, I think, anything that the Houthis are likely to throw at it directly. The big threat here is against the international shipping, and therefore is against the United States. And not only against international shipping, but also attempting to attack a US warship. Now, that should be answered. And if it's not answered, then it's another indication, I think, of US weakness that we've seen in various different places over many years. And so there needs to be a response to that. And it's a response that should be delivered by the US and its Western allies against the Houthis. If it doesn't happen, if that doesn't happen, then let us say this current conflict in Gaza and maybe Lebanon comes to a conclusion. We get closer again towards perhaps a normalization of relations between Israel and Saudi. Then the Houthis have already attacked Saudi on multiple occasions. They're going to want to try and disrupt that progress again. So I think they have to be dealt with.
Right. Let's talk about that. What does being dealt with mean in this case? I mean, is there enough that because there's a lot of irony here involved, because it was the Western allies, especially the United States, that pressured Saudi Arabia to end its military operations against the Houthis in Yemen. Now you're saying that they're going to have to take action. There are reports even that Saudi Arabia is urging the United States to be restrained in its response for the Houthis, because having made their sort of peace, as it were, or arrangement, I won't use the word peace maybe, an arrangement with the Houthis, they don't want to see that war explode again into a full-out conflict.
Yeah, I think what the Saudis are saying publicly and what they want privately to happen are probably two different things, as they are in relation to Israel as well. So I think there is a need for military action by the United States against the Houthis, and I believe that they're likely to be more effective, significantly more effective than the Saudis have been up until now. So I think that's something that's going to be necessary. And secondly, there's clearly a need to take strong action to prevent the continual supply of weapons from Iran and funding from Iran to the Houthis. So that both ends need to be intensified, both military action against the Houthis and prevention of their resupply by Iran.
All right, Richard, stay with us. We're going to move now to the issue of the really overriding issue of the hostages being held by Hamas in the Gaza Strip. Now, earlier we did report that the Israel Security Cabinet and now political cabinet meeting has decided, or has stated publicly, that the increase in humanitarian aid, especially fuel into Gaza, should be linked to the efforts by the Red Cross to obtain access to the hostages remaining in the Gaza Strip. Israeli media reporting tonight that the Red Cross has now started, for the first time, meeting with hostage families with known health problems, asking for their medical files, perhaps indicating that they're going to make more of an effort. Now, any happiness about the hostages that were returned last week, of course, are tempered by concerns and fears, although those still in Gaza. This amid the emerging stories of abuse, physical, mental, and sexual, that they may be undergoing. Now, much of that concern is centered around the fate of the young women, especially that remain in the hands of Hamas. Among them is 19-year-old Naama Levy, who was seen bruised and bloodied in a video that was shot on October 7th, being roughly handled by her captors as she was carried by car in and through Gaza. Now, in a note, I guess you could say of bitter irony, Naama herself was a graduate of Hands of Peace. That is a U.S.-based nonprofit group that organized dialogues of coexistence between young Israelis and Palestinians, and which today announced it is shutting down due to a funding shortage. Well, joining us now is Yoni Levy. He is the father of the 19-year-old Naama Levy being held captive in Gaza. He joins us from Tel Aviv. Yoni, thank you for joining us. I understand how difficult this must be for you. Let me just ask you just about your feelings and your concerns for Naama, based on, of course, what we've seen. Unfortunately, what those hostages in Gaza had to endure during their captivity.
Yes, of course that we are extremely worried about the situation of Naama. Physically, mentally, she's been kidnapped 61 days ago from her bed with her pajama. She's a teenager. She's a girl. And we understand also from the different experience of people that already came back, that it's hell over there. And the situation for a young girl like Naama over there is even more critical. Any day that she's there, he's staying in the hell. And everybody, all the world cannot be quiet that young innocent girls are kidnapped from the bed and no one knowing what is happening with them for so long time.
Spoke talking to some of those organizations that claim to especially be concerned about the rights of women and the defense of women, some of you might call in the progressive camp. And there is an irony, I mentioned it in my introduction, that Naama herself was someone who was an advocate for coexistence. She was part of this group, Hands of Peace, that had dialogue with Palestinians. It actually was reported today that group is shutting down because of a shortage of funds since October 7th. What is your message to the world, especially to those groups on the progressive side of which Naama was part of, especially those that say that they're there to defend women, about some of the silence and denial that they've had since October 7th?
I think this is crazy. This is totally crazy. What happened with the human organization? What is happening with the Red Cross? All kind of World Health Organization. Again, all the progress organization that you just mentioned, and we see how cynical all this kind of organization, the moment we need them, the moment this young girl like Naama, which in her life did not do anything bad, based also on your pictures, you can see she was volunteers in a refugees, young African kids. In 19, she was voluntary work there. She was trying to open this dialogue. Here you see with the young kids that in 19 years old volunteers for them. She's trying to open a dialogue in this Hand of Peace. She's trying to understand the other people of the border, to understand what is their needs, to understand what is their thoughts, what is their culture. And in the moment we need all this kind of organization, they disappear. The Red Cross is disappear. the women health organizations globally disappear. And it's so sad to see this cynical word and this statements or quietness of these different organizations.
Well, you mentioned the Red Cross. There was a news item I just read out before you came on. I don't know if you're aware, there's talk about U.S. pressure to increase humanitarian aid to Gaza. The government's putting out a statement, or no, not putting out a statement, reports, though, the Israeli government may say we need to see the Red Cross make more of an effort, in exchange for that, more of an effort to get information about the health and the well-being of those who are captive. Red Cross reports they're starting to contact captives' families. What would be your specific message now to the Red Cross that is supposed to be contacting the families of hostages like Naama?
From October 7th, we are now counting 61 days. I think the Red Cross, long time ago, need to go and visit the hostages. Naama is wounded. A lot of other people are wounded, need medicines, need medical care. So, frankly, I don't need the Red Cross to meet me or to meet the families. We need the Red Cross immediately. Go to the hostages, to the people which kidnap from the bed, and visit them, check them, give them the medical solutions or medical care that they need. Naama was getting wounded. My daughter, we know that she's wounded. They need her. I don't need the Red Cross. And it's 61 days and nothing was happened.
Right. And finally, just let me ask you, I mean, it's a difficult time for your family, for all Israeli society, and deal with that. Just maybe talk about that, your feelings, the support you've received, but we know there are some differences between policies by the Israeli government internally. Your message and your feelings about what's happening here in Israel in relation to the hostages. I know it's a difficult issue. It's a difficult issue for everyone in this society.
Yeah, so of course, I don't think that there is any country in the world which face this kind of crazy situation, that in the beginning about 250 people are getting kidnapped. It's unbelievable. So I think that in the beginning, also, so the society, everybody was shocked. But in the last few weeks, we got a very strong hug and support from all the society, from all the civil around us over here in Israel, and also in some places abroad. But unfortunately, it's not enough. I need my kid. I need my daughter to be at home. I know she's getting wounded. I know that I know that she's in hell now.
Yeah.
And the support is good, but it's not good enough.
Understand.
It's not help Naama.
Sure.
So this is what we need, Naama and all the other young girls, which is specifically under a very high risk to be bring home back and hold the hostages. All the people which kidnapped need to be back home tomorrow. It's hell over there.
All right. Yoni, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your feelings with us. We know this is difficult, and of course, our deepest wishes here for the safe return of Naama, and of course, all the hostages that are still being held. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Richard, after interviews like that, I barely know what to say, but you've been in situations, I know, in combat situations where people were taken, in situations where the Red Cross specifically operated. I'm going to assume you had some contact with them over the years in your military career. Maybe let's talk about how they're behaving in this situation, and other groups that should be the voices of those people who are being, those civilians, those innocents who are being held hostage in Gaza, and those voices are not being heard. There's voices that are specifically supposed to be there for those people.
I can't imagine what Yoni and his family is going through, and of course Nama as well. The hell, as he described it, they're going through. It's incredible. It's disgusting, really. I think this situation has exposed the reality of many of these organizations that are supposed to be speaking out, supposed to be taking action, supposed to be that a lot of money goes into them to act in some decent way in this sort of situation, and they're not. There's been too much silence, particularly among groups that are supposed to be speaking out against rape and other sexual violence in war. And the reason for it is very simple to understand, and that is the decades-long propaganda campaign against Israel that paints Israel as being an illegitimate country, illegal occupiers, stealing Palestinian land, apartheid, all of these things, this totally false propaganda campaign that has been generated, which leads these groups, of course, many of these different groups have been right behind all of that. They've condemned Israel. They've condemned Israel for abuse of women's rights, for example, when women enjoy by far the greatest rights and freedom anywhere in the Middle East in this country, and so you even hear people from some of these groups saying, well, whatever happened to Israel, it was terrible, but they had it coming. They asked for it because they are an illegitimate country. So we've had this massive propaganda campaign, and these people can't get through it, and they won't get through it. And we will not. Okay, some of them have begun to speak out reluctantly now. Right. We will not see very much of that, unfortunately. And the same applies to the condemnation of Israel for war crimes when it's acting within international law in all of its military operations because of this narrative that's generated by this decades-long propaganda campaign.
Right. We're going to come back to this issue, especially the issue of the sexual violence committed by Hamas on October 7th and afterwards. We should note, of course, there was some bright spots last week with the return of the hostages, some of them providing many stories of human interest, we should say. And one story involving even a non-human, and that's the story of Bella. Bella is the Shih Tzu pet dog of 17-year-old Maya Lemberg, who was also taken hostage by Hamas on October 7th with her mother, Gabriella, as they were visiting a family in kibbutz near Yitzhak. Now, Bella was initially assumed to be missing or killed during the attack, as many family pets were. But incredibly, Maya Lemberg emerged from her captivity. She was one of the lucky ones, clutching Bella in her arms, having taken the dog with her into the Gaza Strip. Now, in fact, Maya has credited Bella's company for helping her survive her ordeal in Gaza. Here's what she and her father had to say about that today.
It was difficult because, all the journey to get there with her, it was, an extra 4 kilos of this small cute puppy. And we gave her like our leftovers so she'll eat, and she tried to walk around the place where we were kept, and we had to make sure she doesn't start exploring too much. But overall, she was a huge help to me. She kept me busy. She was moral support, even though she didn't want to be. And I'm just so happy that I managed to do this journey with her.
From what my daughter said, she was worried that something would happen to the dog if she left her behind. So what she did was she put her under her pajamas jacket when they got into the vehicle and they were driven out of the kibbutz. And then they took them to tunnels, and they went through the tunnels into Gaza, and she had the dog with her the whole time. And then when they came out of the tunnel and they had to climb up a ladder, that's when Hamas people noticed that this was not a doll, it was a living, breathing dog. And a bit of an argument ensued, and it was decided to let her keep the dog instead of leave it behind in a bird cage. And so she kept the dog with her.
Well, that was one of the more fortunate stories to have emerged, but unfortunately many more much, much, much less so. And as we've been discussing, the issue of the sexual violence perpetrated by Hamas terrorists, both in the October 7th attack and based on testimony we've heard subsequently as well, has come to a fore in recent days because of that evidence from the freed hostages who bore personal eyewitness to some of these incidents, as well as the emerging plethora of video and forensic evidence of these dark deeds. Now, Physicians for Human Rights, an organization that usually directs its criticism against Israel, did finally conclude in a report this week about October 7th that, quote, the violence perpetrated against women, men, and children also included widespread sexual and gender-based crimes. And last night, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, as we mentioned, had this to say.
I say to the women's rights organizations, to the human rights organizations, you've heard of the rape of Israeli women? Horrible atrocities, sexual mutilation? Where the hell are you? I expect all civilized leaders, governments, nations to speak up against this atrocity.
And joining us now from here in Tel Aviv is Yael Shira. She is the founder and director of the group Survivors of Sexual Violence Advocacy Group. She joins us now, as I said. Yael, just before this, I conducted an interview with Yoni Levy, the father of Naama Levy, one of those, especially I'm sure you've seen in the video, and concerns about her. Let's talk about what these women must be going through. I mean, it's beyond almost anything imaginable, even within the context of enduring sexual violence and abuse.
Can't comment specifically on what's happening now in the Gaza Strip. I don't feel we have enough information to say. But from the information that we gathered here in Israel, we can say that Hamas has already performed sexual violence and rape of women and men. And the investigation is still on its way. And the testimonies are very, very difficult to listen to and gather.
Right, and there is speculation, or even beyond that. We've heard official statements that some of those hostages, those especially young women that may have endured this, were not released in the recent round of hostage releases, specifically so they couldn't provide testimony about what happened. But there's plenty of other testimony from eyewitnesses that have emerged, especially on October 7th. Let's talk about the response of women's groups. Not all, I don't want to generalize, but many. I'm talking about those abroad that either have not spoken out or have belatedly spoken out or insufficiently spoken out on the very issue that they were created to address.
I must say I'm very disappointed, but not only with women's organizations. As I said, this has been conducted in Israel to both women and men. And I expect every organization that deals with human rights, I expect the UN to speak up and say clearly that this happened. They have testimonies, we have evidence of it. We do have people that survived it, few people, both genders, not a lot. And I do expect the international community, all organizations, to come and defend us and stand by us here in Israel.
Right. Yael, I want to ask you about how Israeli society should be reacting to it in terms of this. Even as a journalist, that's difficult for me to even... I wanted to address this issue in the proper way, in a sensitive way. It's an issue that has to be addressed. It has to be made visible, but it also has to be done in a way to honor and respect those prisoners, men and women, as you say, but also their families that we address to. Let me ask your guidance on that. You've been involved in these cases, you yourself personally, in high-profile cases. How should Israeli society, including us in the media, be even addressing this issue properly now?
I do think we need the police investigation to carry on. I think the most important thing is to be based on evidence, not to spread rumors or fake news, not to violate the privacy of the victims, both living and the deceased. I think it's very harmful to point out at specific people and speculate on what they've gone through or spread rumors about them. I think it needs to stop. And I do believe the police investigation is the most important thing right now. I wouldn't want to jeopardize it by saying anything that is not supposed to be publicized. And I mean, really, it's time to let the victims heal, to respect their privacy, not to try and reach out to them. They are being provided with everything. The government has really taken a really, they want to approach these victims appropriately, not to have bureaucracy or waiting lists. They can have therapy if they feel that they're able to get it or want to get it. It's going to be by experts in this field of sexual violence. And I think we need to give them time. The expectations of them to come forward, to speak up, to be interviewed, right. It's too soon.
So that would lead me to finding my final question. Then what is the role for groups as yours, those that are speaking out, that have, and then even beyond the immediate treatment of the survivors themselves, what is the role for those groups to carry on beyond that in the future?
Well, my organization deals with policy and lawmaking, and we've had a lot to do. There is a lot of work with the government ministries, with the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, and I myself, I deal with health policy. I specialize in the emergency care of rape victims, the collection of evidence in these crimes, and with the forensics science. So I've been working with so many parts of the government. I've been advising on so many issues to do with sexual violence. Unfortunately, I've been needed. And so that's what we've been doing since October 7th. And we'll keep doing that to make sure that the survivors get what they need, that the families get what they need, and that this is not forgotten, and that it doesn't happen again.
All right, never again. Those words were never truer than about this particular issue. Yael Shira, founder and director of Survivors of Sexual Violence Advocacy Group. Thank you for joining us on I-24 News.
Thank you.
Richard, you've been involved in some difficult battlegrounds and battlefields where the issue of war crimes had to be addressed. What about the issue of the war crimes committed by Hamas? Not just the specific ones we've been talking about, but other. How should that be addressed, either by Israel or if the international community, if it will be at all?
Yeah, I think it's going to come down mainly to Israel. Those terrorists that they don't kill, right, arresting them, capturing them, and then putting them through some kind of legal process for their crimes. I don't think we're going to see, as a result of this, any kind of international court dealing with it. And the ICC, the International Criminal Court, have said they're opening an investigation.
Right, that's specifically why I'd ask them. They have said they're opening an investigation. Unfortunately, the ICC historically has not been a body that has shown itself sensitive to the situation in Israel in any way.
No, and it won't. In my opinion, it will focus its investigation, as UN and other organizations like that always do, on Israel and try and get Israel into the dock for war crimes. And they will probably say a few words about Hamas, but not take any real action, even if they're in a position to do so. There may not be any, they may not be able, those people may not be able to be brought to justice because they're dead or because they managed to escape. But I think the only hope of criminal justice being delivered in this case is if Israel does it itself.
All right, and I'm sure that will be the case moving forward, though we're not there yet. But earlier you did mention that a lot of the failure of the international community or international bodies, be it the ICC or some of these private groups we've been talking about, progressive groups, the reason that they've taken this posture since October 7th is because of the wave of anti-Israel incitement, demonization, hatred that we've seen for years, maybe even decades now. Of course, Israel is fighting this war on Hamas on several fronts, and one of them being that battle for world public opinion we've just been discussing. Now, faced with the onslaught of anti-Israel propaganda, many private groups have volunteered to aid the government in its public diplomacy efforts. Now, one of those groups is Israel Spirit, which was established after October 7th, bringing together dozens of content and high-tech experts from across Israel to try and create effective advocacy both in the mainstream and social media. Our correspondent Ori Shapira has more on that particular initiative.
Around 2 months since October 7th, the battle continues, not only in the Middle East, but also in other fields. One of them is the field of advocacy. Here in this hub in central Tel Aviv, dozens of volunteers gather to share their talents and abilities and to fight anti-Israeli propaganda, which is on the increase.
Our main goal is to make 80-90% of those who are chanting Free Palestine shout in favor of Israel. Most of the people who are shouting Free Palestine are not even Muslims. They are the people who support Ukraine. They also need to support Israel. For 20 years, Israel focused on Jewish communities, while the BDS worked and made the story of Free Palestine a trendy and cool story.
The center is divided into several main wings. A content wing which contains writers, producers, directors, and others who create posts, blogs, and even videos. We meet Paulina Patimer, a photographer who joined to document the broken Gaza envelope communities.
Israel is so small country, but I think the world thinks like we are 20% of population because of our, news and stuff that we are doing, but we're actually so minor, and we need to invest so much power and energy and budget and sources in order to spread our news, the real facts and history. So I think if we don't have anything else who can do for us. So it's kind of every Israeli or person who feels that he connects to Israel has to do something in order to improve the perspective in future.
One of the services offered here is media training for Israeli politicians and officials.
What the world needs is they need people to explain it to them in their language. And sometimes, especially, with Israel, there's a language barrier, and not just a language barrier, there's a way of communicating things. Like, for example, Naftali Bennett on Sky News, he did a fantastic job, absolutely fantastic. But it was very strange because he started shouting at the presenter. And my Israeli family were like, yeah, he really gave it to them, he showed them. And my British family was saying, oh my God, he's just destroyed everything. He's done terribly. And it's so funny because that's what I'm saying. You need to be able to communicate in a way that, for example, the Brits, the Americans will understand and take in. And that's what I think Israel sadly misses.
The center also has a technology wing which develops new applications and tools to spread the word better around the world. We also find people who work in human resources and other positions. Sigalit and Amit are a mother and daughter who decided to join this center together.
I had the privilege to work with my daughter. It's an opportunity that who knows when I'll have again. My son is doing reserve military service, so the situation here reflects Israeli society and its ability.
As we are about to leave, we hear a siren and have to evacuate to a safe place. But the people of Israeli Spirit Advocacy Center continue to work, updating information online and documenting their experiences.
Richard, to be fair, and I'm speaking as a journalist who's covered Israel for almost 4 decades now, the government in this regard has made greater effort, made advances in trying to make Israel's case to the world. And there have been effective English speakers. They brought in Elon Levy, who used to be an anchor here at I-24 News, being an example, adopting him as a spokesperson. The IDF spokesperson's office has been more effective in this conflict and getting information out much quicker, maybe not quick enough, but much quicker than it has in the past. For example, the bombing of the Al-Ahya hospital situation. But as someone who has spoken out on behalf of Israel, or the truth, maybe I should say just about the truth of Israel in media, sometimes hostile media, in public forums, what is your sense about how Israel has conducted, either privately or publicly, this public diplomacy efforts during this conflict?
I think the Israeli efforts have consistently been quite good, and they're constantly criticised. The IDF, the Israeli government, constantly criticised for not doing it well enough. The Hezbollah, the propaganda.
And I think in past years that was justified.
Well, I think there is some truth in that, but let's not forget that they're up against a tremendous opposition. This is a propaganda campaign that's been developed since the 1960s and just gained momentum since then. But I do agree with you. I think there's been distinct improvements. Of course, what we must not forget is that while Hamas can claim that the IDF bombed the Al-Ali hospital, the IDF, it doesn't matter what they say, whether it's true or not, the IDF have to make sure that any statement they're going to put out is true, and that does take time. But I do think one thing I would like to see happen, the Ukrainian war, the war in Ukraine, the Western governments, including the British government, have given a huge amount of weaponry, a huge amount of money, and the populations of our country have suffered enormously as a consequence of that. Because of that, the British government, and the same goes for other European governments and the US government, have put a huge effort into explaining to their people why this is necessary. What I would like to see from governments that are friendly towards Israel is for those governments to do the same thing about Israel, to explain the reality of Israel's situation and to try and influence the agenda, the media agenda and the narrative about Israel. They do not do that. They do the opposite.
There is actually something of a discord. Let's take the UK, your own country, for example, between the positions being taken by the government that, at least certainly compared to past governments, has been supportive of Israel, and the feelings that we see in the streets of London and some of the other cities over the past weeks that have been not only not support anti-Israel, but in some cases pro-Hamas. I mean, there seems to be a discord between those.
Well, I've not been in Britain since this war began. I've been here in Israel, but I have been watching closely what's been going on. And the reality is it's a large number of people go on the streets. The vast majority of British people, I believe, are with Israel in this fight and are fully supporting Israel, but they're not necessarily being active about it. Right. I think the real problem that has to be faced, Israel is going to be under fire all the time. That's been the case since '48. Right. It will continue to be the case. The real problem that should be addressed by our governments is the hate against Jews and the fear that Jews in our countries are in because of it, and that's something that really should be trying to get hold of the narrative in order to try and influence that.
All right, thank you for that, Richard. Now let's go back to October 7th, when the Israeli border police fought in more than 35 different locations, killing an estimated number of 500 Hamas terrorists. Let's take a look at some of the fiercest battles that took place there in this report, which is adapted from Israel's Channel 12 News.
יש שני מחבלים מאחורי תחנת אוטובוס מצד שמאל. אין לי מושג איפה קיבלתי, ניסיתי לחלץ אותם. אחי, אתה מאבד דם, אם אתה לא תגיע לברזילי אתה תמות. רוצו אליהם! סע לברזילי, סע לברזילי. סע. בוא. אנחנו חולי איתו.
This body cam footage of a border policeman was taken at the Yad Mordecai intersection, a half an hour after a series of missile alert sirens blasted across Israel on October 7th, 2 months ago. Recently, the border police conducted a preliminary investigation of all battles fought by their units. The investigation revealed 37 fierce battles took place in different locations. Officers confronting Hamas terrorists, and in particular the terror group's Nakba unit. This map drawn as a part of the investigation follows the fighting trail, showing combat zones spreading across all surrounding communities, including Sderot, Ofakim, and Netivot.
אנחנו מבינים שמדובר באירוע שהוא יוצא דופן, ועדיין לא מבינים את ההיקף שלו. אנחנו מגיבים במקסימום עוצמה.
יש מחבלים, אנחנו 4 שוטרים. שרים כתוב, שרים כתוב! הם לא תתכוננות, הם מחבלים! הם מחבלים, תן בהם M16!
In these locations, the border police fighters eliminated more than 500 Hamas terrorists, most of them from the Nakba unit who infiltrated the southern communities.
המחבלים היו שם ושם, מצד שני עדיף, מצד שני. בוא נאגף את הג'יפ. חבר'ה, אנחנו חשופים לגמרי. צריך לתאר רגע את המבנים האלה, פה היה RPG. יכול להיות שהוא מת חוד שלו, אני לא יודע מה עשיתם פה. יש פה איזה מחבל הרוג, אני רואה. אז אולי זה שהיה עם RPG.
The border police captured dozens of terrorists and handed them over to the Shin Bet, to the IDF's 504 unit, and to the police interrogation unit. Interrogations that yielded quality intelligence, aiding IDF maneuvers inside the Gaza Strip.
עוד משפחה יש? זריז, זריז. הילדים שלי שם, שם. תצטרף אליהם. מי אתה? אתה ישראלי? שבור חלון, תבוא. מהר. תעלה לג'יפ.
Additionally, the investigation revealed that the border police fighters rescued thousands of local residents and revelers from the Nova Music Festival. This video is from the body camera of a border police raider, a tactical brigade which rescued the Golani Brigade soldiers trapped inside this APC in kibbutz near Om.
גם כאן, החילוץ של הכוחות הצבאיים, הכוח הבין בעצם שאם הוא לא מגיע ומוציא אותם, עלולים לאבד שם את כל הלוחמים.
נפגעת? נפגעת? אתה תקין? אתה יכול לזכור איפה נפגעת? חזה? הוא פצוע!
אני מבין לכיוון כבר עזה, האם רות?
קדימה, קדימה, אנחנו עם הרבה פצועים.
אחי, תחלץ אותי.
אני מחלץ אותך, אני מחלץ אותך.
This is only a summary of the initial investigation conducted by the border police. Israeli police are still conducting a comprehensive and in-depth investigation, the conclusions of which will likely be submitted to a commission of inquiry that is expected to be established after the war.
And that was how the war started. Let's hope the end will bring some closure to those events on October 7th. And I want to thank Retired Colonel Richard Kemp for joining us here on this special broadcast on I-24 News. And I'd like to thank the viewers for coming to the end of this particular show as day 61 of Israel's war against Hamas draws to a close. But do stay with us. Eli Hulkenberg coming up next for lots more of our continuing coverage of Israel's war against Hamas. Thanks for joining us.
Made for Me, a unique concept in Israel. Custom-made men's fashion to your measurements. Made for Me, designer of all your events. Schedule your appointment at www.madeforme.co.il. Made for Me, official dresser of I-24 News.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Israel is at war. Make an investment in Israel bonds. It is the most powerful and direct way to stand with Israel. Visit israelbonds.com and invest now.
מניח את האקדח על הרצפה. אז מסתבר שאז כן יורים ורוצחים.
Esta semana en News 24, Israel bajo ataque. News 24 en español trae el análisis y la información de los acontecimientos de la guerra Espadas de Hierro.
Entrevistas exclusivas, reportes desde la zona de guerra, la reacción de los países hispanoparlantes.
News 24, el único medio en español que te mantiene informado y conectado con la comunidad latina en Israel. News 24 únicamente en I24 News.
Hello and welcome to the special broadcast here on I24 News as we continue our rolling coverage, day 61 of the war here in Israel. The head of the snake, the main focus of the IDF now is to cut it off. The battles on the ground in Khan Yunis, the main Hamas bastion in the southern part of the Gaza Strip, are at the core of the fight. It is both an operational objective and a symbolic one. Hamas leaders in the Strip, Yahya Sinwar and Mohammed Def, were born there and are believed to be hiding there. But as the remaining days of the intensive fighting are less than they were yesterday, a big question is hovering above. The bigger the expectation, perhaps the bigger the disappointment. And not just that, the day after is closer to then than it was yesterday. But what it's going to look like, still very vague. The only thing Israel is presenting at the moment as a must is a security buffer zone. But if you need one, it means the threat on the other side still exists, doesn't it? So the Middle East is far from Alice's Wonderland, but paraphrasing on Lewis Carroll, if you don't know where you want to go, then it doesn't really matter which path you take. But before we unpack it all and take you live to the ground, here's the latest from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
Last night, I said that our forces can reach anywhere in the Gaza Strip. Now they are surrounding Sinwar's house. So his house is not his fortress and he can escape, but it's only a matter of time before we get to him. Secondly, we exert pressure to allow the Red Cross to visit our abductees. Further to that, I spoke again with the president of the Red Cross and told her to turn to Qatar, which has been proven to have leverage over Hamas, and demand that the Red Cross visits our hostages, and of course, to supply medicine to them.
And we want to begin this broadcast on the northern border. I24 News correspondent Zach Anders with the I24 News team there on the ground. Zach, I wouldn't say slowly but surely, definitely not slowly, but Hezbollah is maintaining the pressure, if not upping it in recent days.
It does seem like this is just a constant rolling boil, that you don't get any relief. There's no moment of clarity here. There's no moment where it becomes obvious what's going to happen. It's just a constant hovering question mark that you can see above everyone's heads, the people that haven't been evacuated. So many people have had to leave this area because they don't know when it will be safe to return. And today, the Defense Minister Gallant met with mayors and heads of council of these evacuated towns and told them that for the security situation to change and resolve in favor of bringing people back, ending the evacuation notice, that they would need to see Hezbollah and Hezbollah's reality return to the 1701 agreement, which came off the backs of the 2006 Lebanon war. It essentially puts Hezbollah above the Litani River several miles inland and creates a buffer zone where Hezbollah is not not allowed to operate. This is an internationally recognized agreement, but it has not been upheld. This has been violated over a decade, and there is no real clear sign that in its current state that there's any meat on the bone, so to speak, to get Hezbollah to adhere to this agreement. So the question now becomes, how do you make that the reality? Well, the soldiers that you speak to here, they point in the direction of that the offensive capabilities are here, and it is possible to repel the number of fighters that Hezbollah has situated along the northern border. But that's not to discount the international pressure that could be leveraged here to get the just simple fact of that agreement acknowledged and upheld, and then everyone back to their corners.
Well, it seems that as we speak, there are diplomatic efforts to reinforce exactly that with someone who brought some results in the past, in the recent past between Israel and Lebanon. Amos Hochstein said to be involved in this attempt to bring about a diplomatic solution to that. Zach Anders, 24 News correspondent on the Israel Northern Front. Thank you very much for your reporting today, Zach. And from north, we're heading south. I-24 News senior correspondent Guy Israel. Guy, the security cabinet, the war cabinet rather, that was supposed to meet tomorrow, convening tonight instead. And what's on the agenda seems to be more fuel, but...
Yeah, Ellie, that is the demand of the Americans to triple the amount of fuel that goes into the Gaza Strip. Obviously, that is a difficult pill to swallow for the Israeli government as it attempts at least to apply as much pressure as possible on Hamas, and especially also given the fact that we have, wow, that was quite a serious explosion heard right here in the city of Sderot. Heavy shelling throughout this evening. So the families of the Israeli hostages, of course, do not want to see increased aid going into Gaza. Nonetheless, the Americans are required to do so. Eventually, the Israeli government, it seems, would bend to that pressure. As, of course, the IDF continues. It's fighting all across the Gaza Strip. Heavy shelling.
Yes, we can hear it.
Right now, we're next to the northern part of the Gaza Strip. Heavy fighting still going on in the neighborhood of Sajaiya in Gaza City, also in Jabalia, both of them in the northern part of the Gaza Strip. But most of the efforts right now are directed at Han Yunis. That is the second largest city in the Gaza Strip. As we heard from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, the forces are there. We also heard this evening from the head of the southern command of the IDF, Yaron Finkelman, urging his soldiers to push ahead. We saw Division 98, that is the IDF Commando and Special Forces unit operating in Han Yunis from door to door, attempting to get hold of Hamas strongholds, killing terrorists, closing terror tunnel shafts. So much still for the IDF to do there, as of course it attempts to apply as much pressure as possible on Hamas in order to bring about the release of the Israeli hostages and of course eliminate Hamas's military capabilities in the entire strip as a whole.
And yet, Guy, I do want to circle back to the issue of fuel, because it's the first time we're seeing this new equation, if you will, fuel for Red Cross access to the hostages, and perhaps an indication that the fuel element is appealing enough, let's put it that way, is the fact that the Red Cross is said to be meeting the families of the remaining hostages tonight. And again, just to clarify, it's not that any agreement is needed in order to grant access of the Red Cross to civilians who are being held captive, and yet in this insane reality, that's the case. And again, it's a new equation, a new mechanism, if you will, to tackle this issue of the remaining hostages.
Absolutely so. And although no agreement is needed for visiting Israeli hostages, that was part of the initial hostage deal that we saw last week. Obviously, Hamas, as expected, did not stand by its agreement, what was agreed with the Americans, with the Qataris. No access was given to these Israeli hostages. Eventually now, it seems, according to that report on Israel's Channel 12, that some access is finally being provided. Obviously, this fuel is necessary both for the water in Gaza and also for the operation of the tunnels, something that is very important for Hamas. This is also the fuel that is being used to launch rockets at Israeli cities. It should be mentioned as well.
I-24 News senior correspondent Guy Israel down south in the city of Sderot. Thank you very much for this. And we now want to welcome here in studio Lieutenant Colonel Doron Avital, former commander of the Special Forces of the IDF, and Mr. Dan Perry, international affairs analyst. Thank you, gentlemen, very much for joining us. Lieutenant Colonel Avital, let's begin with what we're seeing on the ground. We are hearing it clearly from Israeli leaders, from the IDF spokesperson, from the IDF chief of staff. The goal is to apply more and more and more pressure on Yahya Sinwar and Khan Yunis, and yet no one is even raising the possibility of these actions on the ground to result in Hamas waving a white flag. This is not the scenario that we're heading.
We're not looking for white flags. We're thinking of dismantling Hamas. I think Khan Yunis is the last stronghold, the stronghold left after Gaza, after the other places in Gaza that we're fighting at. I think the campaign in Khan Yunis surprisingly goes better than was expected, much more faster than expected in terms of the timetables. What would be the outcome, whether we can catch those commanders of Hamas there in the tunnels, whether we can find our hostages there, it's yet to be seen. But the campaign, I think the feeling from the ground is a very good feeling. I think the army got its confidence, the intelligence is working, the armies are in sync, and the campaign has deployed some decoy in the beginning, which enabled a very fast movement from the north to the south with a very elite division, the 98th Division. So I think in the meantime it looks good.
And in terms of this confidence, I wouldn't say that there was fear, but there was a lot of talk about how the ceasefire, it feels like ages ago, but it wasn't so long ago. How will it impact the going back to fighting on the ground? And this is something that you're saying that is resulting in better achievements on the ground than perhaps expected. But Mr. Perry, I do want to circle back to what we've opened the broadcast with, this targeting of Sinwar, not undermining its importance whatsoever. Again, both practical, operational importance and symbolic one. And yet, isn't it the discourse surrounding it creating too much hope? False hope, perhaps?
I mean, can you really have too much hope? Like, Israelis need a bit of hope. I think the world needs some hope.
Yeah.
Look, Hamas has deployed psychological pressure of every conceivable kind, and this may be the case of the reverse. I don't know if Sinwar is in the house. I doubt it very much. Putting pressure on his family is not something Israel generally claims it would do. The whole thing strikes me as a bit of a misdirection, but we shall see. The jury's out on whether Hamas leaders fear for their own lives. They clearly don't fear for the lives of their compatriots, the Gazan people. I've seen mixed signals about the degree to which they are truly suicidal themselves. I have to note that past efforts to solve the Hamas problem by killing senior people, indeed the most senior people, Rantisi, Ahmed Yassin, didn't really decapitate Hamas. But, you know, my favorite scenario, because no one expects a white flag, as you said, is to put so much pressure on them that at the end of the day, the thing that gives is a Beirut scenario of a departure from Gaza. And in that regard, direct pressure on the families of the leaders might help accelerate the coming of that day.
And speaking of direct pressure, once again today, we've heard Israeli officials talking about the other way to release hostages, not through negotiations, but through operations on the ground. We've seen one successful instance long weeks ago of Ori Megidish, this young Israeli female soldier, and now we're hearing that this is back on the not that it ever was off the table, but the talks are going to get more prominent.
It was never off the table. In fact, we created from the beginning, from the offset, a command that really utilized the Special Operation Command Center of the IDF under the command of Nitzan Alon, an ex-general that was a commander also of the Special Forces. And this was the main task. He was very active in the negotiation that resulted in the release of hostages. But for sure, all the time, the Special Forces are there with their capabilities. The point is intelligence. If there will be intelligence, you might find us involved in some rescue operation, and also you might find the troops negotiating on the ground. This might be a possibility.
Wow.
If you close an area, you know that they are there. There's some Hamas commanders, and like any hostage-taking scenario, you can find negotiation and a possible rescue operation.
And also, as
generated.
Hamas itself suggested, not all hostages are in Hamas's hands, whether you believe to that,
exactly. So if you find them in a different location, the question is all based on intelligence and presence of forces on the ground. The special forces, their capabilities and the readiness for those rescue operations is there.
You actually, if I may,
Please.
readily, do you believe Hamas's implausible deniability that they don't know where the hostages are, that they have to negotiate with others who have a mind of their own?
It might be the case. I'm not going with propaganda. It might be the case that I would think there's certain things that they don't know. I'm sure, but I think they proved to have some command in the previous exchanges. Their command over the prisoners.
Very much so, playing with the lists of names, etc. Those who are some hostages who were said to been killed were released.
For sure. But in the mess in which Gaza is right now, and you don't know what kind of communication works and in what fashion, there might be a disarray also there in terms of the hostages. It's a scenario that we have to take into account.
For sure, but in terms of of Hamas's leaders to control the strip, for better or worse, it seems that they maintain a satisfactory level of control. Let's put it that way. But let's address the other route of action when it comes to hostage release. Mr. Dan Perry, the no negotiations at the moment is also part of the negotiations dynamic, as counterintuitive as it may sound, and walking out of the negotiations is also a negotiation tactic. What opportunity can come out of this crisis?
At the end of the day, I am assuming Hamas controls most of the hostages. It's very sadly roughly up to them at the end of the day.
Yeah.
I had expected that the rate card will change from 3 to 1 in terms of the number of people released, 10 a day to lesser a day, and so forth as they buy more time. I tend to think that the resumption of fighting and everyone walking away from the table on the hostage issue is part of the friction between phase 1 and phase 2. And eventually, if Hamas really wants to buy more time, they'll make an offer that Israel will have to address. The thing is that we all know that this offer that Israel will eventually have to address is going to be very difficult to stomach.
But it's a Hamas offer that needs to come and be addressed. There's no other direction.
They're not ready yet. Maybe a bit more pressure, and eventually they will be ready, precisely as it took them 3 weeks or so to become ready for phase 1.
Well, it's interesting with the 82 scenario, the PLO scenario is possible. I was a veteran of this war. I was on the roof when the PLO guys were climbing on the boats to Tunisia. Whether this is a scenario who would like to have the Hamas in
it almost seems unfair to the PLO. They're so much nicer than a Hamas.
Yeah, exactly.
And
strange to think in those terms right now, but yes.
Yeah, and this infighting on the Palestinian side is perhaps making a comeback. We do hear some harsh exchanges between Fatah officials and Hamas officials, but we'll put that aside and maybe get back to it later on, because now, with all due respect to strategy and tactics, we we want to shift the focus back to the people. 68-year-old Rol Kaplun is presumed captive in Gaza, and we want to welcome now Rol's daughter, Maayan Kaplun Kedar. Thank you very much, Maayan, for speaking with us tonight. I know it's not easy to relive those moments with every interview, those past 61 days. How are you?
Not good. I don't know.
It's the hardest question these days. Yeah.
Yeah, it's impossible. 2 months to be in this situation of uncertainty.
Of not knowing. And to that point, what do you know? When was the last time you got any indication on your father's well-being, on his whereabouts? We do know that some of the hostages that were released provided some information on those who were left behind. Any word on your dad?
Unfortunately, we didn't hear anything from the release of the hostages. The only thing we have basically is the videos that we got from Hamas Telegram from the day of the October 7th. The first one of him being captured, and the second of him laying on the ground. We know that everybody that was with him that day, walking and being captured, first of all, his wife and his neighbors, you can see in the videos, all were murdered. And we know that he was wounded in the head probably, but we don't know the severity, we don't know his condition, and we are worried sick.
And tonight, there are reports that perhaps the Red Cross will finally be given access to the hostages in the Gaza Strip, a glimmer of hope maybe?
I hope. This is one of the prayers I asked for from the beginning of this war, to understand, to get some indication if he's alive, if he's taken care of, or God forbid he's dead. And I beg for some certainty, because not knowing is the hardest thing for us right now.
Yeah, and to that point, last night, a difficult meeting of the war cabinet members with the families of the hostages. Many questions were raised, but from what we hear, not many answers given. What can you tell us?
It was very, very difficult meeting. One of the hardest days from those entire 61 days. Many people went through the edge. They cannot consume all of this anymore. And to that point, there are a lot of barging in the conversation. Everyone wants to be heard.
Yeah.
Obviously, there is a will for the government to do something active towards releasing the captivities. We hear a lot of stuff that we are waiting to get some offers from Hamas, and some of the families feel that we need to be more active.
Yes.
And I think that was a little bit frustrating, because not all the people agree. But I think it's mostly all the tension and all the stress of being in this situation for 2 months.
Absolutely. An inconceivable reality you've been living in the past 61 days. Maayan Kaplun Kedar, we do hope that all those tensions will be over soon, and your father, similarly to the rest of the remaining hostages, will be back here with us as soon as possible. Thank you very, very much for speaking with us. Keep on going. Good things are coming.
Thank you. Thank you.
And now going back to October 7th, when Israel's border police units fought in more than 35 locations at the same time, eliminating an estimated number of 500 Hamas terrorists. This next report brings details and videos from the fierce battles they led.
יש שני מחבלים מאחורי תחנת אוטובוס מצד שמאל. אין לי מושג איפה קיבלתי, ניסיתי לחלץ אותם. אחי, אתה מאבד דם, אם אתה לא תגיע לברזילי, אתה תמות. רוצו אליהם! סע לברזילי, סע לברזילי. סע. בוא. אנחנו יכולים איתו.
This body cam footage of a border policeman was taken at the Yad Mordecai intersection, a half an hour after a series of missile alert sirens blasted across Israel on October 7th, 2 months ago. Recently, the border police conducted a preliminary investigation of all battles fought by their units. The investigation revealed 37 fierce battles took place in different locations. Officers confronting Hamas terrorists, and in particular the terror group's Nakba unit. This map drawn as a part of the investigation follows the fighting trail, showing combat zones spreading across all surrounding communities including Sderot, Ofakim, and Netivot.
אנחנו מבינים שמדובר באירוע שהוא יוצא דופן, ועדיין לא מבינים את ההיקף שלו. אנחנו מגיבים במקסימום עוצמה.
יש מחבלים, אנחנו 4 שוטרים.
In these locations, the border police fighters eliminated more than 500 Hamas terrorists, most of them from the Nakba unit who infiltrated the southern communities.
המחבלים היו שם ושם, מצד שני עדיף, מצד שני. בוא נאגף את הג'יפ. הם חשופים לגמרי. צריך לתאר רגע את המבנים האלה, פה היה RPG. יכול להיות שהוא מת חוד שלו, אני לא יודע מה עשיתם פה. יש פה איזה מחבל הרוג, אני רואה. אז אולי זה שהיה עם RPG.
The border police captured dozens of terrorists and handed them over to the Shin Bet, to the IDF's 504 unit, and to the police interrogation unit. Interrogations that yielded quality intelligence, aiding IDF maneuvers inside the Gaza Strip.
עוד משפחה יש. זריז. הילדים שלי שם. תריף אליהם. מי אתה? אתה ישראלי? שבור חלון, תבוא. מהר. תעלה לג'יפ.
Additionally, the investigation revealed that the border police fighters rescued thousands of local residents and revelers from the Nova Music Festival. This video is from the body camera of a border police raider, a tactical brigade which rescued the Golani Brigade soldiers trapped inside this APC in kibbutz near Om.
גם כאן, החילוץ של הכוחות הצבאיים, הכוח הבין בעצם שאם הוא לא מגיע ומוציא אותם, עלולים לאבד שם את כל הלוחמים.
Quick break and we're back.
手有6个自由度的这么灵巧的手啊，未来。
Goldberg Pauline.
Romy Gonen.
Esta semana en News 24, Israel bajo ataque. News 24 en español trae el análisis y la información de los acontecimientos de la guerra, Espadas de Hierro.
Entrevistas exclusivas, reportes desde la zona de guerra, la reacción de los países hispanoparlantes.
News 24, el único medio en español que te mantiene informado y conectado con la comunidad latina en Israel. News 24, únicamente en I24 News.
Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us. Now to the honest and the broker. As talks to release more Israeli hostages from Hamas captivity are in a standstill of sort. Qatari mediation is bearing fruit elsewhere. 6 Ukrainian children taken by Russia are to be reunited with their families after Qatari involvement. Another stage in the Qatari ladder to global prominence because you can have a whole lot to say, but it is difficult to fight with concrete results the Qataris are providing at the moment. So can Qatar really have the cake and eat it too? We want to head now to Dr. Nasir El-Omari, a writer and political commentator joining us from New York. Thank you very much, Dr. El-Omari, for your time tonight. Well, the role of mediator can vastly vary. In the Qatari case, we're talking about a very hands-on approach, as in not simply passing on messages from one side to the other, but being very, very proactive.
Yes, they are very proactive, and I hate to say it, but they play a double role in the conflict between the conflict in Gaza. They, through Al Jazeera, they have provided the propaganda that is sponsored by Hamas and Iran, and it's dangerous. And I think it plays a critical role in what happens on the ground. On the other hand, everybody wants to please the Qataris. They have a lot of cash, they have energy, and as we can see, even the Russians are trying to please the Qataris and helping them negotiate between them and the Ukrainians. So everybody wants to please these Gulf leaders because they have a lot of resources. And now Mr. Putin himself is taking the time out of war to visit the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, in a bid to give these countries to move away from their alignment with the United States.
So before we talk more about Putin's fascinating visit in the Gulf, you're illustrating his clout, but how did it manage to get to this position of the go-to mediator? What is the leverage? Only resources, only money? This is what we're talking about?
Well, it's money, resources, and they happen to be a staunch ally of the United States. They mediated between the U.S. and the Afghanis during the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. They mediated between the U.S. and the Iranians. So Qatar plays a very important role. It presents itself as being a mediator, as being a neutral, when in fact it's not. It was involved in the Syrian conflict. It's involved today in the propaganda, the Hamas-Iran propaganda surrounding the Gaza conflict. So Qatar plays a very masterful role, and I think everybody's paying attention, including the Europeans and now Mr. Putin and the Arab leaders too.
Yeah, so it seems to be a very efficient mechanism to engage in, self-whitewashing internationally, this position of mediator. But how is Qatar going to utilize this rising political clout that is gaining with its mediation efforts and achievements? What's the goal here?
Well, the goal, they are afraid of the Saudi influence. They don't want to be observed by the Saudi crown prince, who went as far as laying a siege to Qatar. They want to be close to the Americans. They want to show that they have real value. And Mohammed bin Salman is also trying to play the same role. So they are competing here for position. They are competing for clout and power. And they have done it successfully because they can. And they have the resources to finance Al Jazeera, to finance their diplomacy, and they're doing a great job actually in appearing to be a great power in the region.
Yeah, when credit is due, creating a problem just to emerge as its solver. And sometimes you just do things because you can, apparently. Dr. Nasir Al-Omari, writer and political commentator, thank you very much, sir, for your time. Back here in the studio, Mr. Dan Perry, as mentioned, Putin is here in the Middle East, in the Gulf. A first visit to a country that is not bordering Russia since the ICC issued this arrest warrant against him, and I assume it isn't no coincidence that this choice of
maybe
location.
He's just tired of being stuck in Moscow.
No, it is winter. Yeah.
It's fascinating, and we don't know why he's there. But as your report said, it would appear, as the other interviewee said, it would appear that he's trying to wrest them away from their alliance with the U.S., also trying to show he still has clout in a part of the world that the West and the U.S. care about very deeply. Last but not least, he is now weirdly aligned with Iran, and Iran is quite possibly the puppet master of this entire conflict. So if he can somehow put himself in a position of being in some way, shape, or form, or at least impression, some kind of mediator, some kind of even semi-positive force on a world stage, for him that's a win, because right now he's cast into the role of a complete and total pariah, second only to Hitler in the past century. And I think he's actually looking for a way. You spoke of Qatar whitewashing in some sense. Putin's looking for a way to whitewash his, quite possibly. Well. In a way, it speaks of a possible inching towards an endgame in Ukraine, if you want to get really creative about his possible motivations.
All right. To be continued.
He was also active in the release of a few hostages.
Yes, and he has some hostages. Yes.
Yeah, under his demand, all of a sudden, Hamas is willing to...
As for Qatar, by the way, they also have Al Jazeera. Supposedly free media, which does give them
a key role in this very conflict and the dynamics of this conflict. All right, and as the war is still underway, the U.S. has announced it will impose travel bans on extremist Jewish settlers that were involved in attacks on Palestinians in the West Bank. There are still no names specified on this list, but the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken did announce it and said that they're coming. Aside from what it means exactly, the more important question perhaps is, would it make any difference? And we want to head now to Dr. Michael Oren, former Israeli ambassador to the U.S. and Deputy Israeli Minister. Dr. Oren, thank you so very much for joining us on this busy night. What do you make of this announcement at this specific point in time, of course?
Well, good to be with you, Ellie, as always. Well, several points about it. First of all, any state has the right to determine who gets into the borders, who doesn't get into borders. Israel had a controversial law some years ago saying that supporters of BDS couldn't get into this country. Even kept out a couple of members of Congress from coming into this country. So America certainly has the right. But there's several odd aspects to this particular announcement. One, using the word settler, because this is a fringe element, and you're talking about a very large population that is law-abiding, and this population is not small. And it would tend to sort of incriminate an entire Jewish communities of Judea and Samaria, which is a very unfortunate choice. Secondly, how do you determine who gets a visa, who doesn't? Is it people who have a police record, don't have a police record? Are there American observers taking tabs on these hilltop people who are committing acts of violence against Palestinians? I don't exactly know how that would, logistically, how that would work.
Right.
I think more to the point, this is a political message. It's the Biden administration is paying a very high price for its support for Israel in the Gaza conflict. It's looking for ways to sort of appease its progressive base. And this is one measure that it's taking. It's also talking about putting much, much greater emphasis on the Palestinian casualties that Israel is causing inadvertently in the Gaza war. This is all has to do with internal politics, or as one senior journalist in the United States told me, it's not about Gaza anymore, it's about Michigan.
And going back to the ground here, with all due respect to Michigan, it obviously has a big impact on what's happening here in the Middle East. Does this move, this announcement of this ban list, has any potential to change things on the ground for the better?
I think it's sending a message to the Israeli government, also about the extreme members in that government who support this type of violence. And it's important to point out that this violence causes Israel strategic damage. It is harming us. It is constricting the time and space that the IDF needs to complete its crucial mission. And that should be the focus of Israel, solely that focus.
Well, Dr. Oren, National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby, making a much-needed distinction tonight between a permanent ceasefire that we hear many calls to pursue, and humanitarian pauses, as he's putting it, supporting the latter, definitely not the first. And it seems that overall there is this impression in Washington that Israel is at least trying to keep up with the administration's desires.
I think so. And Secretary Blinken, during his last visit here, put before Israel a rather difficult challenge to both expedite the operation and to cut down on the number of Palestinian casualties. And clearly, if we expedited the operation, we'd probably cause more Palestinian casualties. It's by going slowly and being cautious and trying to go to the utmost to make sure that Palestinian civilians are out of the battle zones, that they're warned by SMS, text messages, by leaflets to get out of there. I don't think that the administration would like us to rush into these areas and not wait for the Palestinian civilians to get out. But having been said, I think that there's a good momentum for the IDF in Gaza right now. And we're just going to have to weather this criticism. I go on a lot of European TV programs, and that's the word Hamas almost doesn't come up anymore. It's all about the charge that Israel's deliberately harming Palestinian civilians, and you have to explain the best of it you can that charge makes no sense, because surely morally it's not in Israel's interest to cause Palestinian civilian casualties, but strategically, the greater the number of Palestinian civilian casualties, the greater the pressure on Israel to agree to a ceasefire. And a ceasefire means Hamas gets away with mass murder, and it means that large swaths of the state of Israel will no longer be inhabitable. So why logically, unless you impute to the Jewish people some type of evil impulse, why would Israel want to increase the number of Palestinian casualties?
Well, I guess it's a healthy combination of short-term memory and long-lasting prejudice. Dr. Michael Oren, former Israeli ambassador to the U.S., Deputy Israeli Minister, thank you very much for this. We appreciate your time and insight always, Dr. Oren. Thank you. Back here in studio, not that we want to get to that point, and obviously everything will be done in order to avoid that point, but officials in Washington are talking about a couple more weeks of operational leeway for Israel. What happens then? What does no American support look like?
I don't think we will get to a position or to a moment in the battle with no American support. I think we work with the Americans. We saw Blinken in the war cabinet. So the question is negotiating back and forth the moves in the war. So now we're in a phase, I think it's the third phase of the war, basically. Yeah. And it will end sometime, I hope in a few weeks. I hope before Christmas for the Americans.
Yeah.
And then there will be the other phase. Now the question whether it would end with some exchange deal, whether it would end with some ceasefire. Of course, we can't accept no terms that means the end of the war, because the war might continue to different phases. Yeah. And after Hamas is eradicated, hopefully, or most of his capabilities, and the hostages are back, hopefully, which looks a little bit far in the future, then we have to think of the new phase of Gaza.
Yeah, it's quite ironic that a war between Islamic fundamentalism and Jews is dictated by the Christian calendar, but it seems to be the case. And we're staying in the U.S. because we can use a whole lot of words to describe the congressional hearing on anti-Semitism in elite American campuses, but there are not a lot of words needed, really. Bottom line, for university chiefs, calling for the genocide of Jews is A-OK. Take a listen.
Does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Penn's rules or code of conduct? Yes or no?
If the speech turns into conduct, it can be harassment. Yes.
I am asking specifically calling for the genocide of Jews. Does that constitute bullying or harassment?
If it is directed and severe or pervasive, it is harassment.
So the answer is yes.
It is a context-dependent decision, Congresswoman.
It's a context-dependent decision. That's your testimony today. Calling for the genocide of Jews is depending upon the context. That is not bullying or harassment. This is the easiest question to answer yes, Ms. McGill.
If the speech becomes conduct, it can be harassment. Yes.
Conduct meaning committing the act of genocide?
One of those university presidents who refused to condemn calls for genocide against Jews was Harvard President Claudine Gay, but after a public backlash at almost 24 hours after refusing to do so in Congress, she has now released the following statement. You'll be the judges of that. There are some confused a right to free expression with the idea that Harvard will condone calls for violence against Jewish students. Let me be clear, calls for violence or genocide against the Jewish community, any religious or ethnic groups are vile. They have no place at Harvard, and those who threaten our Jewish students will be held to account. All right. I-24 News senior U.S. correspondent Mike Wagenheim joining us from New York now. Mike, there are many chilling moments in those past 2 months. I must admit this, albeit not graphic, is horrifying.
The statement that President Gay released a few hours ago, when she refers to the confusion, as if the confusion is on the outside and the confusion wasn't generated from her own mouth yesterday in Congress, is just an example of the gaslighting that Jewish students have to face here in America on college campuses, extending now to high school and even elementary schools, especially here in New York. We've seen incidents lately. It's just unbelievable, the lack of responsibility that these folks will take, and it goes beyond that. We heard a lot, Ellie, of lawyerly talk yesterday, not much moral clarity, not much leadership, a lot of lawyerly talk, because in the end, if you get fired, you want to make sure legally your behind is covered. So we heard a lot of mentions of case law, of the First Amendment protecting you in accepting cases of bullying, pervasive harassment. This is case law. This has come out of the courts. This has not come out of people within leadership positions on college campuses. And the First Amendment here in America is, rightfully so, very cherished. The government can make no law that abridges your right to free speech, and the courts have held that right filters on through to public institutions. You don't lose that right just because you're in school, whether it's in college, high school, wherever. But the courts have found that if you're disrupting a school activity or the operations of a school, if you are doing other things to violate school policies, regardless of the particular message that you're espousing, the First Amendment doesn't protect you. I'll give you an example here, Ellie. I'm guilty every now and again of using the middle finger out of anger. That's protected here. You can use it. There's no crime against it, even to a police officer. There was a recent Court of Appeals decision that found that you could flip the bird to a police officer here. He can't charge you or she with anything. Not a crime. Now try doing that on a college campus. Try walking up to your professor and you didn't get the grade you liked and flipping them the bird and see if they can't find something in the student code of conduct to bring you up on and discipline you on. You telling me people have free reign to flip off their school professors? It's nonsense what these university presidents were espousing yesterday, that they can't find anything within their policies that would call for discipline for students calling for the genocide of Jews. It's ridiculous.
And one can only imagine a protest in one of those campuses calling to restore slavery, God forbid, or wipe out the LGBT community. In no other circumstances would we have been facing that. And yet, Mike, speaking to that point of no moral, yes, lawyerly type of statements, I want you to take us to take a listen to an analysis by our very own I-24 News senior diplomatic correspondent Owen Alderman, saying even though the blood is boiling listening to it, the university heads are not lawyerly wrong. Let's put it that way. Let's listen.
Yeah, an opinion that I think a lot of people are not going to like. But Sarah, at the end of the day, those university presidents are largely right. I mean, listen, obviously physical violence of any kind is completely out of bounds, and they said that themselves. And there are certain expressions, right? And you talked about them in your lead, about gassing the Jews and so forth, which I think might be considered over the line. But even there, look, there are a lot of phrases being used, like from the river to the sea and globalize the Intifada and even others, which have ambiguity in them. And it's an ambiguity that frightens Jewish students, that is, I think, fair to say, as we heard from the president of Penn, is hateful speech. But at the end of the day, ambiguity in a climate like the United States, particularly universities where we have to preserve freedom of expression, and in my opinion, even at private universities, should be preserved to the outer bounds of the First Amendment, ambiguity has to be resolved in favor of allowing the speech.
Well, Mike, before I ask you if there are any teeth to it, to this congressional hearing, as in, are we to see any action? Mr. Dan Perry here with us in studio. What do you think? What is more dangerous, policing free speech or not policing it at all? Is that even the discussion?
No, it's not the discussion. The issue is that these universities have a duty. They're duty bound to be a beacon of light and of reasonability. You know, the lawyerly aspect of the presentation is a disgrace. I'm an alumni of Penn. I know the motto of the university, and it is this: laws without morality are vain. They have a duty to be moral. And instead of morality, what we see here is a complete and total abdication. Look, back when I went to Penn 30-some years ago, it was a bastion of liberalism, as what were MIT and Harvard, and a beacon of humanity. And right now, because of the progressive revolution, it's become a bastion of illiberalism, and we see that they struggle mightily with humanity. We disaffiliated from Penn, the Penn Alumni Club of Israel, on which I am on the board about a month ago, over a month ago. And I was on the fence about that decision. Yeah. And as I watch President McGill and her disgraceful performance before Congress, I become a lot less on the fence.
Yeah. Mike, so what is next? Any action to follow, or just those unforgettable remarks, let's put it that way?
I think what it showed, I think there was an opportunity yesterday for those particular college presidents. By the way, in fairness, don't represent all college presidents. Obviously, they represent some pretty high names. There was an opportunity for them to set the tone and say, we can handle this problem, or at least give us the chance to handle this problem internally within our own campuses, administratively. That was the opportunity that was put in front of them by Congress yesterday. They failed miserably. And so where does it go from here? I think it's going to take action at the federal level. There's already investigations underway. into several of those universities for violations of civil rights under several different acts, including the Education Act, for essentially allowing a pervasive environment in which Jewish students fear for their safety, in which they can't take active part in campus life. I think the Biden administration here and Congress are going to have to kind of seize this and run with it and make sure that it's handled at a governmental level, whether it involves the revocation of public funds, which don't apply to those private universities, or other sanctions. It simply it can't be entrusted, at least to those three particular so-called leaders that were in front of Congress yesterday.
Yeah, context for rape of Jewish women, context for the calls to eliminate Jews, context so crucial when it comes to the Jews, apparently. Mike Wagenheim, I-24 News, senior U.S. correspondent, thank you very much for this. Dan Perry, I would carefully say the silver lining here, the Republican rep Elise Stefanik, who handled this cross-interrogation eloquently, and the voice of reason in this on this instance. For sure not easy for many liberals to find themselves siding with on that side of the divide. Let's put it that way.
But they don't. The liberals in America find themselves in quite a pickle.
You don't think that many liberal Democrats who watched this congressional hearing
No, they sided with the Republican questioner, because in America today you do not have a left and a right. You have a conservative right, you have a progressive left, and you have the liberals who are in the middle. The liberals do not agree with the progressive movement on almost anything. And if the Trumpist right in America were not as horrible as it is, they would be moving in droves to the Republican Party.
Yeah, but Stefanik is said to be, I'm personally not familiar with her political career. She's the youngest congresswoman, very impressive, but she's said to be a Trump loyalist and likely to play a role in
That's why I say they're in a pickle, because the Trumpist right is more pro-Israel than the progressive left. But that doesn't really taint the Democratic Party in a way that many Israelis would think, because most Democrats are not yet progressive. Only about a sixth of Americans subscribe to the point of view that is represented by these university presidents. This is the issue. It's still a minority. Most Americans support Israel in this conflict. Most young Americans, half of them don't. And that is what you're seeing at the universities. Universities should be helping to fix this problem. Instead, because in the end they're led by adults and not by the kids, instead they're succumbing to it. And that is why you see what you see from the university presidents.
So, as Mike said, even if we are to see federal steps, it might not have a direct implications on those private universities. What do you foresee?
Well, what's going to happen is back when I went to Penn, it was 40% Jewish. Now maybe a third of that, and falling. A lot of the funding comes from Jews. The Jews are going to pull the funding. Jews are going to apply in lesser numbers to these universities, and of course, the shortfall may be made up by the likes of Qatar. So you're seeing a generational shift.
This is exactly what I wanted to say. We started this part of the broadcast with Qatari money. We're ending it with Qatari money. With Qatari money. The flip side of that, Lieutenant Colonel Italia.
Surprisingly enough, how blind they are to the context in which the question was asked. If talking about context, in this context, they should have said, "By our position is definitely against."
The easiest statements. Yes or no.
It's very strange. So
they did want to offend the students.
Exactly.
It's as simple as that.
It's an amazing.
And that is an abdication of one's role as an educator at the end of the day.
Well, I wouldn't want to offend you, so I will thank you very much, Dan Perry, for joining us. Lieutenant Colonel Avital, you're staying with us. A quick break, and we continue our coverage. Day 61 of the war here in Israel that far exceeds the geographical borders of it. Back in a few.
Israel is at war. Make an investment in Israel bonds. It is the most powerful and direct way to stand with Israel. Visit israelbonds.com and invest now.
Made for me, a unique concept in Israel.
Custom-made men's fashion to your measurements. Made for Me, designer of all your events. Schedule your appointment at www.madeforme.co.il. Made for Me, official dresser of I-24 News.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
And in health in the future.
Welcome back to this special broadcast here on I-24 News, day 61 of the war here in Israel, and we want to head straight back to the south, to the southern city of Sderot, what is left of it at this point in time. I-24 News senior correspondent Guy Israel standing by there with the I-24 News team all day long. Guy, a day of intense fighting in the Gaza Strip with the main target clear-cut, Khan Yunis.
Yes, we're now in the city of Ashdod, and yes, throughout the day we've spent in Sderot listening to the heavy fighting there on the border, both IDF shelling, fighter jets, helicopters, even heard live fire throughout the day. That was in the northern part of the Gaza Strip, where the IDF is still operating in the neighborhood of Sajaiya and also in Jabalia. But yes, all eyes are on Khan Yunis. That is the main goal of the Israeli military right now. A major city, the second largest city in Gaza, a major stronghold of Hamas. And this evening, soldiers of the 98 division, including commando soldiers and special units, are operating inside the city, walking from home to home, searching for those Hamas terrorists. As we heard from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, the forces are surrounding the house of Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar, an IDF spokesman confirming that he is not expected to be in that house, of course, but nonetheless, both him and Mohammed Def are believed to be in the area of Khan Yunis. In any case, the IDF is closing in on these major commanders of Hamas, trying to apply as much pressure as possible on this terror group, with the goal of eliminating it altogether, but also attempting to reach a better deal for the release of Israeli hostages. We saw over 70 of them released under the deal last week. And now, if Israel wants to get more Israeli hostages back alive, they need to apply more pressure on Hamas. This is the goal right now. And the IDF troops are there, those very brave fighters on the streets of Khan Yunis. Not an easy surrounding at all, very different terrain from that of Gaza City. And this is the operation at this moment. In various spots across the Gaza Strip, thousands of Israeli troops are operating at this very hour.
Yes, and Guy, you've mentioned this notion that the military pressure will improve the chances of releasing the remaining 137 hostages. And to that point, or on the sidelines of that, the expanded Security Cabinet is convening tonight to approve what we understand is some sort of a new formula in which fuel will enter the strip, will rise gradually in exchange for access, finally, access of the Red Cross to the remaining hostages there.
Yes, fuel is of high demand for Hamas, both for ventilating its terror tunnels, also for the supply of water, and of course for the firing of rockets. As for the release of hostages and to the access of the Red Cross, well, of course, that was also part of that deal last week, where Hamas did not fulfill its part of the deal. The effort right now to bring in that fuel is mainly by American pressure. Israel needs the American support, of course, to continue its fighting throughout the Gaza Strip, fighting that is expected to last many more weeks, perhaps even months. And at the same time, the Israeli government is demanding those visits of the Red Cross. Whether the Hamas terror group will eventually allow that, only time will tell. For now, it has given no such access and no word about the well-being of those 237 Israeli hostages still being held there across the Gaza Strip, in terror tunnels and in other places, many of them in need of urgent medical care that they are not getting, very sadly.
I-24 News senior correspondent Guy Israel, thank you very much on your reporting today. Back here in studio with Lieutenant Colonel Doron Avital. Lieutenant Colonel Avital, earlier in the broadcast, we were talking about the newly announced policy of the U.S. of banning extremist settlers who were engaged in violence against Palestinians in the West Bank from being granted a visa. And now, as we speak, Belgium is announcing the same. How does it play into the greater scheme of things on the ground? The West Bank is a boiling pot already.
I think it's a political signal. The significance is more political. I think it's an important and significant political signal, can even help us, because we really want to keep the West Bank calm. We really have problems with those extremists that do those riots, and we are trying to contain them, of course. But the situation is, in this respect, is not easy. Of course, we don't want to blame the whole population in the West Bank.
Of course.
I mean, everybody is very adamant about making this distinction that we are talking about
French groups.
Let's hope. I mean, but I think it's a signaling that we have to take into account and think seriously how to contain those youngsters and the troubles they inflict on the situation in the West Bank. They really take much of the energy of the army in trying also to
to that them. Point, as again, all officials are vowing to address all of this once the war is over. But if we're talking about the notions of the threats that are more prevailing before October 7th, on October 6th, the West Bank took a lot of resources and attention.
A mini war taking place in the West Bank for a year or so before. This took our attention from Gaza and other fronts. But right now we want to contain the West Bank. We want to make sure that it's calm as possible, as fewer terrorist attacks generated from the West Bank, though we had this terrible terror attack in the entry to Jerusalem. We have the problem in the northern Samaria, we have a problem in Hebron. It's not an easy task, the West Bank, and we want to contain it and to keep it as calm as possible.
And every single day, every single night, the IDF is operating there to make sure that we will be talking about what's happening in the south and not about what's happening there, not because there is no desire, but simply because this desire is foiled. But Lieutenant Colonel Avital, I do want us to jump back up to the north because again there are these reports tonight that Amos Hochstein, the White House official who mediated the maritime agreement between Lebanon and Israel not so long ago, is now engaged in efforts to finalize a ground agreement rather that will illustrate anew the borders between the countries. And yet we're talking about Lebanon and Israel. We're not talking about Hezbollah.
Of course. Hezbollah doesn't have to comply with whatever decision that will be made. Of course, I mean, this is the diplomatic campaign with regard to the 1701, the UN resolution of 2006. This is a good point of reference for us because we would need this buffer zone for our citizens to come back to the north. And I think even Gallant came with a very strong declaration that nobody would come back unless Hezbollah is withdrawing to this line, the Litani line. Could such achievement be made only by diplomatic campaign? I'm not sure, but I would say the following: even if in the end we'll find ourselves in a military campaign, we have to start with a diplomatic campaign. We don't want to start a full-blown war in Lebanon without any diplomatic campaign that precedes it and maybe give some result, or if not, give us the reason, the excuse, or to go into the casus belli to go into a campaign in the north.
A group we have yet to discuss tonight, Lieutenant Colonel Avital, perhaps because it is not so much an Israeli problem, but an American problem. And I've said it on our broadcast before. Perhaps the only ones who are putting their money where their mouth is, the Houthis, that are creating havoc.
This is a new intervention. In the meantime, our defense mechanism and the U.S. defense mechanism works very well and proves itself against their missiles and so on, but they do this havoc on the seas with all those cargo ships. Of course, it creates a havoc, also economical havoc for
all around the world.
Of course. Yeah. And I think right now the Americans have said that they would work out when and how to react. We've seen a few things in Sana. There's no way to assign them to us or to the U.S. I think the Houthis is a problem that will be taken care of. I wouldn't say this is our greatest problem right now. What we want is to keep the Hezbollah out of the war. We want the West Bank calm. But this is a general problem that goes back to the Biden initiative of this corridor that starts from India into Saudi Arabia, and they are over there trying to derail the process. So it's
global trade route, just destabilizing the entire world. I
think Napoleon said the Indian Ocean is the key to the world geopolitics of the Indian Ocean. You go to the Red Sea.
They all, we might reinvent politics, or we think so, but we definitely do not reinvent geopolitics, geography, that is. Lieutenant Colonel Avital, before we bid you farewell and thank you for your time with us tonight, what are we to see this weekend? We are nearing the weekend for the Jewish people. It's the holiday of Hanukkah, and we've been discussing the Christmas clock, if you will.
Exactly. I hope success and keeping the momentum going in Khan Yunis. I hope closing on the leaders of Hamas that are still situated in Khan Yunis, and maybe maybe Sinwar, who knows, this would be the biggest prize. And of course, for sure, our hostage, some clue about our hostages, some deal, some rescue operation, whatever can bring them back home.
Or at the very least, Red Cross access, 61 days, and still has yet to happen. Lieutenant Colonel Doron Avital, thank you, as always, for your time, for your insight. We very much appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
And yes, as we speak, there are still 138 Israeli hostages in Gaza, young and old, women, children and men. According to those who have been released, there's grave concern about their condition. More in this report.
Is everything okay? My mother was kept in a 1.5-room apartment. She was in one small closed room, and the couple lived in the other. There was a small window in the room, which they closed, and she couldn't see if it was day or night. As soon as she realized she was alone, she simply told us, "Listen, I decided, I read, I studied all the stories from the Holocaust. I will keep a diary. I read that Gilad Shalit used to do some sports, and that's what kept her going." She realized very quickly that they prayed 5 times a day, and she would simply count prayers. She would record it in a journal, and the prayers and sound of the muazzin, all these things gave her a complex of understanding what day it was, what night, what hour, and she revolved around that.
When I come to them, they see the distress. You see the distress. Yola, Yael, all the time by their mother's side. She never leaves Adi. Until 2 days ago, she whispered. She didn't speak at all, not out loud. Now there a little more, but you know, he's well aware from the moment they were kidnapped what happened. He saw everything. He doesn't speak at all. Not asking. Not about the father, not about the grandfather. As far as we know, all 6 of them were in one place. Tal was not with them, no.
We saw some of the children who came with orthopedic injuries. There is a girl who needed surgery. Injuries to the legs, injuries to the hands, scars that were on children, a burn on a child's leg, which he said was a burn from a motorcycle. We saw very low hygiene conditions, at levels I don't remember encountering on children. Stories you hear from other areas, lice, rashes, skin infections.
Some of them lost weight in a very, very significant way. What does that mean? 10 kilos in children, a lot. They arrived, and after the first meeting with the family, what is the first thing they want to give children who meet them? We let them eat, and at some point we found ourselves taking food from the children's rooms so that they wouldn't eat too much when they arrived. That's why I pulled yogurts and rolls out of the children's hands so that it wouldn't be too much.
We will have to continue to support them and give them everything they need, both now and in the future. But they are amazing. We've received an inspiring group of children.
We know that she did not know, for example, what happened to her father. She was very pleasantly surprised to see her father in that famous video, that she actually ran quickly, at the speed of light, into her mother's embrace, and suddenly she saw her father, and she was sure that her father had been kidnapped. She did not know that her father was saved and got out of it. The first thing she asked, after looking around her and suddenly didn't see Lior, her brother, she asked about her brother, and the parents had to tell her. This is actually the first thing they told her after she returned, about her brother, that her brother was murdered. From what I know, and this is almost the first thing I heard from her when I saw her, this whole time she was without shoes. For almost 2 months, this girl was without shoes.
She says that she was humiliated very much, that she had a very difficult experience, that she was treated badly, and this is now engraved in her heart. Everything she does, she remembers the experience from there.
Was she there alone?
She's very scared for the abductees who remained behind.
They're still in danger.
She was literally brainwashed there, really, and she doesn't live in our world right now. She's still there.
It's impossible to cope there. It's impossible. We have to get the abductees out of there. If we don't get them out now, they won't get out alive.
How did she keep her sanity? What did she do all day?
She says that most of the time she just looked at the wall. That's what she had to do, and only occupied herself with thoughts of, my daughters are fine, my daughters are fine, my daughters are fine, my daughters are fine. She kept trying to convince herself.
Are there things that we don't see, but you can say that something has changed?
Her enthusiasm for every little thing, from the most basic things she had before, I don't know, maybe a towel for the shower or some chocolate or something to drink, you suddenly see the light in her eyes, that she accepts such things. Or used to. She was always, we'd waste our dinner, throw away food as usual. Today we're forbidden to throw away food. There's no such thing. Save everything, put it in the fridge, find a place.
זכינו לטפל ב-29 שבים עכשיו בשבה ה-30.
We were privileged to take care of 29 returnees, now the 30th returnee. Almost all of them without exception. The first thing they wanted to do when they met their families was to talk. We heard a lot from them about the psychological games that were played with them as part of the psychological abuse they went through. So it's also related to information that they share and don't share. As part of the psychology of the captive, of creating dependence on the captives. But by my feeling, from what I hear from the people, is that it has been refined at very high levels.
What do you mean, elaborate psychological terror?
The feeling is that it was sophisticated, not random or unplanned, orchestrated, not some kind of relationship that develops by chance between a certain captor and a certain abductee, but to create the psychological infrastructure to play on their minds in a way that would achieve their goal.
Was there also evidence of abuse?
Yes. But I won't go into details. As I said, I can say it's about the whole range of abuse that a person can dream of. And when I hear some of the returnees who just want to talk, and I found myself sitting by their bedsides for hours and listening to their stories, it's no different from testimonies of people who survived the ghettos or concentration camps. It sounds the same. I think we can't sleep at night because of those who have returned and the stories that they have to tell. And I say again, it will take time for it to come out. And we still have a lot of people there who are being held in bad conditions. And as the days go by, they're still there.
Yes, these are the stories, these are the times, the sign of the times. Hope mixed with fear, contained relief mixed with grief, and perhaps most evidently among those who return back home and yet left part of their hearts in the Gaza Strip. Gary Moses, the son of Gadi Moshe Moses, who was kidnapped to Gaza from Kibbutz Nir Oz, and the son of released hostage Margalit Moses is joining us now. Yair, thank you so very much for speaking with us. We do know it is not easy. And first of all, how are you? How is your superhero of a mother?
Well, thank you. My mother is feeling better. She's getting her strength back. And slowly, she is realizing and understanding and learning what happened here in Israel on that terrible Saturday.
Right, because it's not just the homecoming, it's the recapping of everything that happened in this parallel universe here while they were in captivity. Now, with every day passing, we hear more and more details of what captivity looks like and feels like. You don't have to, of course, but if you'd like to share with us some of what your mother had been able to share until now.
Well, what we are willing to share is how she kept positive and have the strength to believe that she will be back home, because she did believe it. And what she did is try to stay vital as much as possible in order for her to feel that she's needed and know she's needed. So the people that were with her, she helped them wherever she can, even to get up for people who were tired and weak, to stand by themselves. So she helped them to stand up when they needed. She tried to cheer them up with singing song together or playing words game, whatever they could do in order to stay positive and stay vital and keep the belief that they will be back home.
Helping others helped her to help herself. This is magnificent. Yair, your father is still there. Tonight, reports that the Red Cross might finally get access to those hostages. Fingers crossed, of course. A glimmer of hope, maybe?
Yes, sure, because we are shouting this for 2 months now.
Yeah.
That how can it be that the Red Cross didn't see them yet? It's unimaginable to see them. People are there. We don't know their situation. We don't know the status. We don't know even if they're alive, wounded, sick. Are they getting any medical care, medicines, food? We don't know anything about them. And we need the Red Cross to be there and update us. I understand maybe the negotiation to release them might take some more time. I hope not. I hope it will be today, tomorrow. But in any case, we need to know what is their status. We must know it.
Absolutely. And to that point, last night, quite stormy, challenging, that's for certain, meeting of the War Cabinet with the families of the hostages, seeking many answers that were perhaps not given, some understandably not given, others less so. What can you tell us?
I wasn't there, so I'm now I'm traveling to the US. I'm in Detroit now, so I wasn't in that meeting, and I heard that there was a lot of shouting, and this is something that we, the families, are asking the government to update us what's happening, and not each time we demand and shout hard enough, then they set a meeting. It needs to be something regularly that we'll know, we can ask questions, get some answers. We understand they cannot tell us everything what is going on, but we need to be updated more than what happened now. And this is very hard for us, the situation itself. So we need to feel that everyone are with us. And sometimes I believe they do whatever they can. I don't think they're just sitting and do nothing, but not updating the families. It's very hard for us not to know what's going on.
Yes, no matter what is happening, at least this communication line will be accessible to you, and not that you will have to demand it every time anew. Yair Moses, we are wishing you and your mother easy days ahead, and of course, more than all else, that your father will be brought back home very soon.
My father and all the other hostages must come back as soon as possible, and we need to do everything we can do in order to bring them back.
138 hostages that are all should be back home, not now, but yesterday. Thank you very much, Yair Moses. We're sending a lot of strength to you and to your mother.